This thing has staggered on for weeks now, this phony war. Who do you think's come out ahead so far, Putin or NATO?
Well, first let's just get some perspective. This isn't the Cuban Missile Crisis or anything like it, despite what are some of the more excitable parts of the media and politicians get to. Secondly, for President Putin, he knows very well there's a vast difference between launching an invasion and successfully completing it. And the successful completion is not in his control. There's the weather and, of course, the Ukrainian armed forces themselves, which are not shabby. What's going on? I suspect President Putin has had a very good exercise and has demonstrated to the Ukraine that he's the big boy in the woods, and NATO is in this respect toothless, which isn't a great surprise for the Ukraine, of course, because they're not actually a member of NATO. From there on in, who knows what happens?
Why do you think NATO, Joe Biden certainly, but also Monsieur Macron and Boris Johnson are reacting like this? I mean, right now what's happening is that the Russian military are holding military exercises with Belarus on what is Russia's sovereign territory. And for some reason, Joe Biden's chosen to make a fuss about that. I mean, the Russians were scheduled to be doing naval exercises just off the coast of Ireland. And as far as I'm aware, you know, Dublin and London didn't oomph that up into a great big war-making and war-threatening and saber-rattling thing. So why has Joe Biden principally chosen to make so much of this?
Well, he hasn't told me. I suspect one of the things that's happened, and these exercises have been going on since November, but one of the things that has become increasingly apparent is that NATO kind of lacks the hardware to do much about an aggressive Russia. Poles apart, possibly some Germans, although they seem to send helmets. Russia does hardcore military capability, and particularly heavy armour, and NATO sort of moved away from that. I think this has sort of snuck into the headlines, and there's now, to be honest, a fair amount of posturing. I mean, we've just announced that we're doubling our commitment in Estonia, which is 1,000 miles from the Ukraine, and doubling our commitment means sending 30 tanks. You know, the Ukrainians have got 1,000 of their own, and Russia has many, many more than that. So I really don't know. There doesn't seem to be any coherence.
Just on that point, what's the point of filling up Estonia with tanks? I mean, Hungary has said they were going to move a whole ton of stuff into Hungary, and Hungary said, no, if you don't mind, we've got all the military hardware we need. We don't want any fighters from Western Europe, soldiers from Western Europe coming in. What's the point of filling up distant countries in Middle Europa with NATO troops and equipment? What's the point of that?
Well, obviously, all the Baltic states are actually part of NATO, so we do have treaty commitments, and it's always useful to give the impression, at least, that you're serious about your treaty commitments. I think Mr. Putin's desire to, in some stage, unite the Rus peoples within his influence. The Hungarians aren't Rus, the Baltic states clearly are. Does it amount to much, and will it change his thinking? I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, there's a difference between, and being, in terms of real politics, there's a difference between annexing a bit of a neutral country or an unaligned country like the Ukraine, as opposed to parking your tanks in a NATO ally. And Mr. Putin is not reckless. So, again, I think quite a lot of this is being done for public consumption within NATO, and perhaps to reassure particularly the Baltic states and to a lesser extent Poland, that actually NATO has got some teeth and some will to use it, although quite how much teeth we've got and quite how capable it is an open question at the moment.